1 in 10 individuals will suffer from PCOS. That's actually more common than diabetes, just to put that into perspective. And we've all heard of diabetes, but PCOS is actually more common.
Hello and welcome back for our second episode of PEP Talks. Did you know September is Polycystic Ovary Syndrome Awareness Month? In today's episode, we're unmasking a subject close to many, but often hidden in the shadows, PCOS or Polycystic Ovary Syndrome. It affects millions globally and more than just a medical term. For some, it's a real daily reality that has a profound, yet frequently unrecognised impact on workplace wellness. Whether you're an HR or benefits professional and you're aiming to nurture a compassionate work environment, or maybe you're directly touched personally by PCOS or know somebody who is, this episode holds essential insights for you. We know that PCOS affects around 1 in 10 women of reproductive age here in the UK. But do we know how it actually affects their everyday life, especially at work? That's what we'll be uncovering today, and I'm thrilled today to have with me Anne Howard, an expert in fertility and women's health, and a practitioner who supports employees day in, day out on the Peppy app. Anne's going to shed light on PCOS and the impact that it can have on women in the workplace. And with PCOS Awareness Month in full swing, it's just the right time to discuss how PCOS is impacting people in the workplace and what employers can do about it. Anne, please give us an introduction to yourself and your background in women's health, with a particular focus on how you ended up specialising in PCOS.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you so much for the introduction. So, my name's Anne Howard. As you said, so I have worked in fertility and women's health for the past almost 14 years now. That makes me feel a bit older now. But worked in fertility and women's health for the past 14 years. And this essentially has given me a wealth of knowledge and experience within women's health, but obviously also within fertility as well, in helping couples and individuals realise their dreams of perhaps becoming parents, however way that may come about. But one of the things that it really has given me a focus on is polycystic ovary syndrome, and just because there is so many different ways that this can be treated. It comes into fertility, it comes into women's health, and it is a bit of a special interest of mine, very much, and it's allowed me to increase my expertise, and I have had my own journey with PCOS. So for me, it's a real thing close to my heart that I really want to help individuals with, whether that is through general symptoms or fertility options. So sort of this is where I'm coming from when we talk about PCOS.
Thank you, Anne. I'm so glad you're here. You're absolutely the right person to be talking to. We're going to move into our myth-busting section now. It's often misunderstood, PCOS, that term. So let's debunk some common myths. So, for example, some may think that PCOS is very rare. Is that true?
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think actually you mentioned it earlier when you were speaking. Actually, 1 in 10 individuals will suffer from PCOS. That's actually more common than diabetes, just to put that into perspective. And we've all heard of diabetes, but PCOS is actually more common. So it affects around 1 in 10 women. And the problem is, and the reason I think why people think it's quite a rare condition, is it either goes undiagnosed, and because it's got such a wide range of symptoms, it can actually be quite difficult to diagnose at times. Although we do have quite a robust way of trying to diagnose it, but often people don't necessarily pick up on those symptoms. They don't necessarily get PCOS diagnosed. So people often think that it is a more rare condition than it actually is, and it isn't really spoken about. And there is this misunderstanding in relation to PCOS. So it means that it goes unrecognised, it goes unsupported. But this is something that we need to change. But in answer, that's a long-winded way of answering your question there, Kathy. But it isn't rare. It is actually really common and something we should be talking about.
More common than diabetes. That's a fascinating statistic that I was certainly unaware of. There's another misconception, and that's that those with PCOS will always have difficulty conceiving. Can you delve into how PCOS affects fertility and the options available for those who do want to conceive?
Absolutely. And we'll debunk that straight away. So if you've got polycystic ovary syndrome, you can get pregnant. Okay. And I'm going to explain that. However, in some cases, it can be a little bit more difficult. Now, one of the symptoms, and there's an array of symptoms, but one of the symptoms of polycystic ovary syndrome is either irregular periods or a complete lack of periods whatsoever, which can make it incredibly difficult to actually pinpoint when ovulation is happening, or if ovulation is even happening at all. Okay, now ovulation is the process when we actually release an egg, and we hope that it's fertilized by a sperm and to create an embryo and so on and so forth. So when we don't know when that is actually happening, it can make it very, very difficult to try and become pregnant. Now, again, I would say not everybody experiences this. There are many, many, many individuals out there who have PCOS, who have become pregnant, and they've become pregnant naturally with no issues whatsoever. But yes, there are people who may struggle. Now, there's a variety of things that we can do. Now, PCOS in terms of treatments, and I'll sort of stick this to fertility just for the moment, as that's what we're talking about. The variety of treatments, you can start off with the basics of just lifestyle changes. And actually just certain lifestyle changes can actually sometimes regulate periods, therefore regulates ovulation a little bit. So that may be all you need. We can then move into certain treatments that perhaps help to regulate ovulation. There are certain tablets that you can receive either from GPs or fertility clinics that can help regulate ovulation. So this is almost like your next sort of, perhaps stage. We then potentially do move on to more invasive treatments, things like IVF. Okay. But just because you have polycystic ovary syndrome, it does not mean that you're going to need to go straight down that route of IVF. Okay. Yes, it's an option. Absolutely, it's an option. I've treated many, many people who have had PCOS and had to go to IVF. But we've also got lots and lots of options beforehand, which can actually be very, very successful. And actually, a lot of people find these options beforehand successful, and they get success and they become pregnant from that. So, yes, it can affect fertility, but it does not mean that just because you've got PCOS, you're instantaneously, not going to be able to get pregnant. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And following on from that, really, does it sometimes happen that people don't know that they have PCOS and it's uncovered when they have fertility investigations?
Yeah, very much so. And actually, when I was within clinics, it was something that was really common where we would, people would perhaps come to us and they may have sort of said slightly irregular periods, and you go to scan somebody and you look, and actually you're talking about polycystic ovary syndrome, and actually they might not have actually had any kind of clue that they had this. But that was something that we could then go, okay, this is what we have here. Let's look at how we can treat that. And, just because it's a fertility clinic as well, my background is fertility clinics, but just because fertility clinic, it doesn't mean, again, you're instantly going to IVF. There's often many, many more steps before you get to that stage. So this is certain things where actually people didn't necessarily know they had this. They perhaps thought not to go to the GP. It might not have been something that ever even crossed their mind. They might have thought, oh, my mum had irregular cycles. I'm just doing what my mum did. And people don't always recognise that. So yeah, that is common as well.
And some people will associate PCOS with some of the other symptoms that it affects, things like acne or excess hair growth in particular. Does PCOS always lead to those somewhat more extreme physical symptoms?
Yes. So when we are looking at PCOS, when we look at the symptoms, there is an array of symptoms, as we've said. So we've got irregular periods, we've got lack of periods, we've got potential fertility issue. We then have these symptoms that you're talking about. We have acne, we have perhaps excess hair, we perhaps have hair loss, we perhaps have weight gain, perhaps sleep disturbances, depression, anxiety. There's an awful lot. Now, when we look at these symptoms, what we have to do is we have to look at them as though they are on a spectrum. So you will have people at this end of the spectrum here who might experience a lot of these symptoms. They may have quite a large amount of excessive hair. They may put on weight very easily and struggle to lose it. And then we have people right down here at the other end of the spectrum who have no idea that they've got PCOS because actually their symptoms are so mild they don't know they've got it. And we sort of find people sort of all in the middle here. Okay. So Just because you have PCOS, that does not mean that you are instantaneously going to be growing all this excess facial hair, for example. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to suffer with skin issues. What it may well be one of your symptoms. And I can't rule that out at all. And again, we may experience these symptoms at different levels. We may find that, it might not be facial hair, but actually some people, hair doesn't have to be on your face. It could potentially on chest, back, bottom. You may find that it's in different areas. But there are ways and means we can treat that. And again, we work at it from sort of, different levels. We start off with perhaps looking at lifestyle. Can we change anything with that? Can we make anything a little bit better in terms of lifestyle? Because we very much know that certain changes in our lifestyle can actually really help when it comes to PCOS symptoms. And then we can move on to, there are medications that actually can treat acne. That there are certain pills, if you're not looking to become pregnant, there are certain hormonal contraception pills that can help with acne and facial hair and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we can do to try and ease these symptoms. So just because you've been diagnosed with this, it doesn't mean you're going to have all these extreme physical changes. That is one end of the spectrum. And absolutely, there are people out there very much, making people aware of it, which is wonderful, which is brilliant. We want people to be aware of it. But it doesn't mean you're going to have those symptoms. You may be somewhere along this spectrum of symptoms. And it's just how we manage that and treat that, which is really where we delve into.
And I can imagine that for people who do have some of those symptoms, they maybe feel a bit embarrassed sometimes, or maybe it causes some confidence issues. And I can imagine that perhaps at work is an issue.
Yeah. So when we are, we are looking, a large portion of the sort of population who have PCOS are working age women. Okay, or assigned female at birth. They're working, and of course, you can imagine that potentially in this day and age, we know it through sort of various social media and so on and so forth, that actually our image can sometimes be very important to us. And if you're not happy with that, whether that's through perhaps excess weight, whether that is through a hair where you don't want hair, or hair loss. That is another symptom where that's hair loss as well. Yes, it's going to massively affect your confidence. It's going to affect your self-esteem. This will then, work. It then works its way into your working life. We spend a huge portion of our time at work. So of course it's going to work its way into your working life. As we experience these, we perhaps have these self-esteem issues that we are struggling with. This then leads to things like anxiety. It leads to things like depression. And again, these can have a massive, massive impact on, again, our daily life, but also our working life. We look at our productivity, we look at motivation, and these are all things that sort of, we require in our working life. And this is where it can become an issue.
Thank you. And the last bit in this section, people might think of PCOS as being actually just a personal issue, and people deal with it alone. Why do you think that actually isn't the case?
It's not the case at all. Not the case at all. And this is what we want to bring to awareness. This is why we want. This is why this month and these weeks are so important to bring awareness, because it is not just an individual issue. It's not just what we could call a woman's issue. It's not that. If anything, it affects relationships. It can cause emotional stress, and support from partners, friends, family is crucial. And it's crucial for people to understand this condition and how it might affect people. It may be that people actually are struggling to conceive, and actually perhaps they're going down that kind of fertility journey, in which case support is paramount. When it comes to journeys like that, understanding within the workplace, it means that you can provide this compassionate, comprehensive support at work. So it is definitely not one of those issues that we should struggle along with alone. And this is the same with many other women's health conditions. And I'm sure you'll agree, Kathy. We don't want individuals to suffer alone. There is so much support that people can give out there.
Yeah, it's so much harder when you're trying to do things on your own, isn't it? Many of us will know people who in our lives have faced workplace struggles for all sorts of health reasons, of which one could be PCOS. And can you share a real life story for us, perhaps, to illustrate some experience with PCOS and in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So During sort of I suppose my working day, we support many individuals who are actually having experiencing PCOS, and this isn't necessarily through fertility. This is generally through lifestyle and through work. And we've had a number of individuals come to us. One particular individual, which was just a lovely story actually, came to us, and she was really suffering with weight, with depression, with anxiety, and just really poor self-esteem. And this is, she's just not feeling good. Again, a young working age woman, she's trying to function in daily life, in work and personal life, and is struggling. So we had a consultation with her, and we were able to offer her various lifestyle changes, but also certain supplements that we know that can potentially support PCOS. And we then later, actually quite reasonably quickly after she had started these supplements, she reported back to us saying how good she felt, how much better she felt, and and how much, and she was asking, could we give advice to others for this? And this is one of those success stories, which is wonderful, that actually just with some small changes, how somebody who was feeling really quite rotten, within their life and their workplace, some small changes with this particular condition that we know that we can't cure, but we can manage, actually really helped her. And actually, she was able to talk to us. Her employer had us as Peppy. She was able to talk to us, and that really, really helped her. And that was a great support service for her. And I can bring my own journey into this, and by finding the right support, the right information, I went down so many different avenues and tried so many different things that just didn't work. But when I found that right support, actually, my confidence improved, my ability to do things like this and speak to you about it improved, and it's just brilliant how we can provide that support, and actually how workplaces can do that as well.
It's lovely to hear a real life story of somebody that you've helped, and I'm sure she appreciated that very much. And it's time for some quick insights, and we only have a few minutes for this section, so I'm going to ask you to keep your responses short and snappy, okay? So in just a few words, can you just tell us again how PCOS could affect somebody in their daily work life rather than at home?
Okay, so we've got a few ways. So we've got physical challenges. So PCOS can cause quite chronic fatigue. It can cause problems with your sleeping. Can cause quite sort of pain when you have a period. They can be quite heavy and painful. So you've got these physical changes, these physical changes, which are not great. So that's instantly going to be one of these things which is going to affect your productivity at work. We then have these emotional struggles. I mentioned earlier that people with PCOS are more prevalent to have anxiety and depression. This is going to affect your motivation. It's going to affect your productivity at work. And one thing as well, which in terms of when we need to be, when we're talking about people at work, we need employers potentially be flexible. There's possibly the potential that actually people are going to have medical appointments. They might be looking to have this diagnosed, in which case they are having appointments potentially for scans, blood tests, things like that. We may be looking at appointments for fertility treatment. So there are, you're looking at three areas there, really. You're looking at, there's some physical challenges, there's emotional struggles, and you've also got that need of flexibility when you're looking at diagnosis within the workplace.
So what would you say are the top three things that you'd like employers to be aware of?
Okay, so I suppose if I was a manager and someone came to me, so the first thing, you'd want an understanding of this condition. So somebody is coming to me as a manager and they're saying they've got this condition. Now, I don't expect managers to know about all these different types of conditions, but what would be great is if your manager then went, right, you know what, I'm going to go find out about this condition. Okay, I'm going to recognise what this condition is. I'm going to understand what these physical and emotional symptoms are, so I can understand what they're going through and how it might affect their performance. So that would be my first port of call, and something that doesn't necessarily happen. We then have, you then want to try and create is this supportive environment. You want to implement, you might want to look at implementing policies that perhaps promote flexibility when it comes to appointments. You might want to, I've heard of various employers creating almost like a PCOS or an endometriosis or a champion. So this is this person who you're able to speak to and able to come to that person so they can help direct you for the correct support, which I always think is really, really good. but then also promoting awareness. So it's not just as a manager, say, learning yourself. So it is that, but it's then also educating other people about this particular condition, educating other people about PCOS and, and what this might entail. And, and that then creates this, or you hope, you'd like to think what it does is it creates this almost empathetic and understanding workplace culture where everything it's more open. There's very much this sort of open door policy where you can come and speak and you know that you'll be listened to and you'll be understood. And I think these are areas that potentially do need improvement. And this is what I would, in my ideal world, this is what I'd like to see.
Very good, thank you. And we're not here to cast any blame, but what would you say are common mistakes that employers make when they're trying to accommodate people with PCOS?
So I would probably say sort of the lack of personalisation would be one. So you sort of give it sort of just generic support, so generic just women's health support, lumping all sort of women's health conditions into one and not really giving that specific support. Perhaps not focusing, perhaps focusing too much on the physical sometimes and not looking at emotional well-being and mental health as this is a very big portion of, it's not a big portion of PCOS, it's a big portion of women's health in general, but, acknowledging how emotional stress can have an effect. So I think a lot of the time we focus a lot on the physical and what we can see, and a lot of the time it's not just about that. But then also you perhaps not necessarily providing that open communication. So, perhaps not creating that comfortable environment that people feel they can come in and speak to. And this is not, I don't want to be casting, you don't want to cast blame or anything like that. But these are things that perhaps, mistakes that are made. But equally, there are areas that are easily fixed and areas that can be improved upon.
And on that note, I'm going to give you one more challenge. Can you give us one action that employers could take today to support those better with PCOS? So just one, Anne.
Just one, okay. So I would say create. Oh goodness! Oh, and I like to talk, Kathy. So. I'd probably say create that supportive, open environment, say an open dialogue. You want to be that manager that people come talk to. That would be communication would be my big thing. You want to be the person that people are able to speak to. So if I was to pick one, it would be that communication is really important and creating that comfortable environment.
Okay, so let's imagine this scenario that I'm going to give you. And so somebody comes to her line manager. She's about to present in a big meeting. She's coming to terms with the diagnosis of PCOS, but her confidence has taken a bit of a bashing. Partly because of her weight gain. She feels a little bit out of touch with her own body, not terribly confident. As a manager, how would you respond to that? And listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. Do share them via social media or email. You'll find our details in the description. Anne?
Yeah, absolutely. Love to hear other people. So I suppose somebody is coming to you with this, and what you want to do first, Paul, is listen to them. Is be there and listen. Understand that that they have got these challenges, that they have, that their confidence isn't great. Perhaps closely work with them to try and increase that confidence. Perhaps work closely with them to provide tailored accommodations, maybe, perhaps a little bit more flexible working hours if they're really struggling with this diagnosis, those flexible hours to be able to get that support, perhaps outside of work that they may actually need. They may need, if they're particularly fatigued and they're really struggling, it may be looking at perhaps additional breaks. It may be looking at remote working, if that's something. Now, these are all suggestions. I'm not saying that this is gospel. I'm not saying this is absolutely how you have to do it. But these are all things that potentially you could consider. We could look at perhaps HR. What benefits have we got? Have you got as a company? What healthcare coverage have you got that perhaps could have PCOS support in there? Have we got perhaps an environment that can, that foster that supportive environment? Have we got perhaps the help for, in relation to nutrition, to physical health? is that there and available so that we can also provide that support? Because I often find people who are diagnosed with PCOS, you feel really lost. You don't, a lot of the time you don't really know where to turn. And if you are one of those people who perhaps has increased weight, and often you just get told to lose weight and that's about it. And often it's lost in terms of how do I even begin to do that. So sometimes you may have that through benefits within your company. So that might be a good place to try and help people navigate and turn to. But also creating empathy. And this is the important thing. This is what I said first, it is empathize, listen, support your colleagues. You might want to train other people. You might want to train other people in this particular condition. You might, as I said, I mentioned earlier, you might want to have a champion really, who is somebody that, can provide that support. Maybe it's, for example, like myself who's had a journey, you may want somebody like that who can provide initial support to help sort of get rid of the stigma of PCOS. What you really want to be doing is creating that inclusive workplace. Now, I suppose in specific for her to, she's not feeling confidence is great. She's not feeling great about her body. And it is about just really encouraging that individual and encouraging them in what they can do. And sometimes just them knowing that you're there to support and you're there to be flexible for them actually can just sometimes really increase that confidence. Knowing that somebody perhaps understands and is there to support you. So these are little things. It's not gospel, but these are things that you could perhaps think about.
Yes, and sometimes it is those little things that actually collect together to make quite a big impact, isn't it? From today's conversation, Anne, it's been so useful. It's been so useful, and thank you. We've understood that PCOS is a significant concern in the workplace, but that there are some simple steps which can be put in place to support people with PCOS. And I'm going to summarise some of what you said, Anne, and I'm going to give you the chance to tell me where I've missed out important things afterwards. But as I understand it here, you've really stressed to me that PCOS is not rare, and you said it's more common than diabetes, which is a statistic that really surprised me, actually. It's not talked about as much as diabetes. PCOS is complex. People experience it in totally different ways. There's no sort of set experience with PCOS, and nobody will experience it in quite the same way. It can have physical symptoms, but it can also have emotional effects as well because of those symptoms. So therefore, mental well-being, emotional health, and sometimes job satisfaction are really affected by it. So that means that employers do have a role to play. And if they can recognise and accommodate the needs of employees with PCOS, it's a real step in the right direction to improve the support that's needed. So awareness, education, understanding, you said really were key elements of it. Making sure that people understand the condition, understand what it is, and being able to be compassionate and understanding, perhaps especially as a manager. And that means that then when people understand it, they can take steps like flexible working schedules, creating healthcare packages to support people with PCOS, and collaborating and creating a place where people feel comfortable to be able to talk about it if they wish to. So I guess that means that all levels of an organisation need to make those changes effective, from senior leadership right down to people communicating with their colleagues as well. I think that's a really important step. So, Anne, thank you for your conversation today. Is there anything that you think I've missed or that you'd like to summarise with?
I think you've summarised that beautifully, Kathy. You've covered absolutely everything. And, it's about awareness. It's about talking. It's about being open and understanding.
Well, thank you, Anne, for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for listening today to Pep Talks, Health Matters at Work. If, like us, you love talking about all things health and work, do hit the subscribe, leave a review and spread the word. Your feedback drives our content. And if there's a burning topic that you'd like us to cover, then please just let us know. Next week, we'll be discussing all things urology at work with our expert guest, Helen Lake, who has 30 years of urology experience. Until then, let's continue making health matter at work.